It was the darkest moment of Maria's life. After hours of labor, the doctor delivered the devastating news. Her newborn baby hadn't survived. The room fell silent as her heart shattered. Family members tried to comfort her, but the weight of the loss was unbearable. Maria, overwhelmed with grief, felt an emptiness that no words could fill. Later that evening, as she sat in the hospital waiting area, her instincts wouldn't let her rest. Something didn't feel right. Against the advice of nurses and family, Maria asked to see her baby one last time. She needed closure, even if it meant walking into the morgue. Her hands trembled as she pushed open the heavy door. The room was cold, and the air carried an unsettling stillness. But just as she stepped inside, she saw something that stopped her in her tracks. There under the dim light stood the doctor, acting in a way that Maria never expected. Her sorrow was quickly replaced with confusion and disbelief. What was going on? What she discovered in that room would change her life forever. Stay tuned to uncover the truth behind this heart-wrenching yet extraordinary story. Maria's breath caught as she stared at the scene before her. The doctor, the same one who had delivered the tragic news, was hunched over something on the table. His movements were frantic, his expression unreadable in the dim light. For a moment, Maria thought her grief was playing tricks on her. What could he possibly be doing in the morgue so late at night? She hesitated, her heart racing, as she stepped closer. The sound of her shoes on the cold floor echoed in the silence. The doctor looked up abruptly, startled by her presence. His face was pale, and his eyes darted around the room as if he were caught doing something he shouldn't. "What are you doing here?" Maria's voice was barely above a whisper, her words trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. The doctor didn't answer right away. Instead, he seemed to struggle for the right words, as though weighing how much to reveal. Maria's gaze shifted to the table behind him, and her heart sank further. What she saw didn't make sense. It wasn't what she expected at all. Her grief turned into confusion, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening, a secret she was about to uncover. The room felt colder now, and Maria's pulse quickened. She tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Behind the doctor, under the stark white sheet, there was movement, small, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. Maria's breath hitched. "Is that my baby?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The doctor froze. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but hesitated, glancing back at the table. "Maria, you need to understand." He began, his tone oddly defensive. But Maria didn't wait for an explanation. She pushed past him, her hands shaking as she reached for the sheet. What she saw left her speechless. Her baby, alive but fragile, let out the faintest cry. Tears welled up in her eyes, a mix of relief and confusion flooding her all at once. "How is this possible?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "You told me she was gone." The doctor looked at her, his face filled with a strange mix of guilt and urgency. "Maria, listen to me," he said firmly. "There's more going on here than you realize. You weren't supposed to know." His words trailed off, leaving more questions than answers. Maria clutched her baby tightly, her mind racing. What had really happened? And why was her baby declared dead in the first place? Maria's mind spun as she held her tiny baby, feeling the warmth she thought was gone forever. The doctor's words rang in her ears, but they made no sense. "What do you mean I wasn't supposed to know?" she asked, her voice sharp. "This is my child. How could you let me believe she was gone?" The doctor took a step back, running a hand through his hair. He looked like a man torn between regret and fear. "Maria, I had no choice," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are protocols, things happening here that I shouldn't even be telling you this." Maria's heart pounded. Protocols. This is my child we're talking about, not some experiment. Her voice cracked as she clung tighter to her baby, who let out another faint cry. The sound ignited something fierce in Maria. She wouldn't let anyone take her daughter from her again. The doctor hesitated, then leaned in closer. You don't understand what's at stake. If they find out you've seen her, they'll. He stopped mid-sentence, glancing nervously at the door. The distant sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Maria's stomach sank. Whoever they were, it was clear the doctor was terrified. You need to leave now, he said urgently. Take her and run. Maria's pulse raced as the footsteps grew louder, their steady rhythm sending a wave of panic through her. She clutched her baby tightly, her mind spinning with questions and fears. Run where? What's going on? She whispered harshly, her eyes darting to the door. The doctor moved swiftly, guiding her toward a back exit she hadn't noticed before. There's no time to explain, he said, his voice urgent. Just trust me, get out of here before it's too late. His eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, and she saw genuine fear in them. Maria hesitated, torn between leaving and demanding answers. But then the door to the morgue creaked open, and two figures stepped inside. Men in suits, their expressions cold and calculating. Doctor, we need to speak with you, one of them said, his voice calm but commanding. Maria felt her heart stop. The doctor glanced back at her, then turned to face the men, trying to block their view. I'm in the middle of something, he said, his tone forced and steady. But Maria saw the shift in their eyes. They weren't buying it. As one of the men stepped forward, scanning the room, Maria slipped through the back door, her baby pressed against her chest. The doctor's voice echoed behind her, growing distant. As she stumbled into the dark hallway, her thoughts were a chaotic blur. Who were those men? Why was her baby declared dead? And what was the doctor so afraid of? But before she could make sense of anything, she heard a low voice from the shadows ahead. Maria, you shouldn't have come here. Maria froze at the sound of the voice, clutching her baby as her eyes adjusted to the dimly lit hallway. A figure stepped forward, a nurse she recognized from earlier, her face filled with a mixture of pity and urgency. You don't understand what you've stumbled into, the nurse said in a hushed tone. I just want to keep my baby safe, Maria whispered, her voice breaking. Why would anyone do this to us? The nurse glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear. There's a program, an illegal one, she said quickly. Some babies are, taken under false pretenses, claimed to have died. And then her voice trailed off, but the weight of her words hit Maria like a thunderclap. Maria's knees felt weak, but there was no time to process the shock. The nurse grabbed her arm. You have to leave the hospital. Now, there's a car waiting for you at the back entrance. I'll distract them. Why are you helping me? Maria asked, tears streaming down her face. The nurse gave a small, sad smile. Because I've seen too much of this, and I can't live with myself if I let it happen again. Maria ran, her baby's faint cries urging her forward. She found the car, a driver waiting anxiously. As they sped away, relief began to flood her, but it didn't last long. Hours later, when they reached a safe house, Maria held her baby close, grateful to be out of danger. But as she looked at her daughter's tiny face, she noticed something odd, a faint marking on her arm she hadn't seen before. It wasn't a bruise or a birthmark. It looked deliberate, like a small symbol. Her relief turned to unease. What did it mean? And was this truly the end of their nightmare, or just the beginning of something she couldn't yet understand? Maria couldn't take her eyes off the strange marking on her baby's arm. Her heart sank as questions flooded her mind. She gently traced the symbol, wondering if it held the answers to the nightmare she had just escaped. As the hours passed in the safety of the quiet house, Maria began to piece things together. The nurse's words echoed in her head, babies taken under false pretenses. The symbol must have been part of some identification system, proof of their involvement in whatever illegal operation she had unknowingly uncovered. But Maria was done being a victim. She knew she couldn't rest until she ensured her daughter was safe and exposed the truth behind what had happened. With help from the kind strangers who had driven her to safety, Maria contacted authorities she trusted, sharing everything she had witnessed. It wasn't easy, but the investigation that followed revealed a network of corruption far more widespread than Maria had imagined. Thanks to her bravery, the operation was shut down, and countless other families were spared from the pain she had endured. As Maria looked down at her baby, now healthy and safe in her arms, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Against all odds, they had survived, and their story would serve as a reminder that even in the darkest times, a mother's love can light the way to justice.